We all desperately want to believe in magic, especially when it comes to human connection. We're conditioned by our culture, by folklore, by literally centuries of storytelling to seek out that one, fated affinity, a bond so incredibly exceptional that it feels like it was preordained by the universe itself. But as we peel back the layers of human behavior in this explainer, treating our absolute deepest desires as evidence in a psychological investigation, a much darker and honestly far more fascinating reality starts to emerge. Think about it. What if the most magical connections in your life are actually beautifully disguised psychological traps? Traps designed by evolution and reinforced by our own cognitive biases. Right off the bat, let's look at this. Love is mostly about negative emotions. Wow. It's a statement that just immediately shatters the whole fairy tale, right? See, when we experience that undeniable, heart-pounding spark with someone new, we call it destiny. We call it love at first sight. But beneath the surface, the truth is far less romantic and infinitely more complex. What we are perceiving as this mystical, effortless connection is, well, it's often just a potent cocktail of anxiety, fear, and deeply unresolved psychological drives. Which brings us to the central mystery we're deconstructing today. Are our deepest connections just cognitive illusions? I mean, why is it that the relationships that begin with the most intense, earth-shattering chemistry so often end in the most dramatic, devastating failures? To understand what is actually pulling the strings here, we can't just stop at the obvious surface-level explanations. We have to dig deeper. So let's start peeling this back. Layer 1, the surface illusion. And dropping right beneath that, we hit layer 2, the biological reality of chemistry. We have to move past that surface illusion, the comfortable fiction that compatibility is just something you magically discover in a spark of chemistry. Because what's actually happening in your brain and body when you feel that undeniable spark? Well, first off, it often begins with the misattribution of arousal. Physical cues like fear, thrill, or anxiety are frequently misinterpreted by our nervous system as romantic passion. It's wild, but highly anxious people often fall in love more frequently simply because they confuse their own nervous system's distress signals with romantic chemistry. Second, we've got evolutionary scent matching. We are literally biologically driven to seek out genetic makeups that mimic our parents. And third, perceived partner responsiveness. We feel an intense bond when someone simple takes turns sharing thoughts and validating ours. It's an intricate, unconscious social dance of mirror neurons and survival instincts. It's definitely not a message from the cosmos. And then there's transference. When you feel a profound, instant familiarity with a total stranger, your brain is likely just taking a cognitive shortcut. You aren't recognizing a soulmate, you're actually activating a permanently stored unconscious representation of someone from your past. Maybe it's a parent, an ex, a childhood friend. You are projecting highly familiar traits, linguistic habits, and completely unresolved feelings onto an entirely new person. You feel deeply connected because, psychologically speaking, you are quite literally reacting to a ghost from your own past. Moving deeper still, we uncover layer 3, the twin telepathy trap. So, if our connections are largely biological drives and psychological projections, why on earth does the illusion of magic persist so strongly? Well, consider the folklore of twin telepathy. We've all heard the myth of extrasensory perception, right? The idea that twins can literally read minds or physically feel each other's pain across long distances. But the psychological reality reveals absolutely zero scientific evidence for the supernatural. What is actually happening is just the result of shared environments, extreme familiarity, and a deep emotional connection from birth. Long-married spouses do the exact same thing. They predict thoughts and finish sentences not because they're psychic, but because they've accumulated years and years of massive behavioral data on each other. Our brains actively manufacture this illusion using two really powerful cognitive biases. First is hindsight bias. People, whether they're twins or self-proclaimed soulmates, obsessively record the synchronous, coincidental events, but they completely ignore the vast majority of non-synchronous moments. And second is retrospective falsification. We subconsciously distort and embellish our memories of shared events after the fact, just to make them align with society's expectation of a mystical bond. We are essentially the unreliable narrators of our own relationships. Now, how does this affect society at large? That takes us to layer 4, climbing Mount Maslow. Let's look at the actual sociological consequences of demanding a preordained soulmate. Behavioral scientists call this the suffocation model, or Mount Maslow. See, historically, marriage sat at the very base of this mountain. Its purpose was practical, fulfilling basic physiological and safety needs. But today, contemporary couples have pushed marriage all the way up to the jagged, freezing peak. We now demand that our relationships fulfill our highest, most complex psychological needs for self-esteem and complete self-actualization. We want our partner to be our lover, our best friend, our therapist, and our spiritual guide, all rolled into one single human being. But here is the fatal flaw in that design. The psychological oxygen at that altitude is incredibly thin. Reaching those high-altitude relationship goals requires a massive, continuous investment of time, energy, and deep psychological resources. I mean, to help someone self-actualize, you need profound mutual insight. Yet the evidence shows that modern couples are actually investing less time and less psychological fuel into their relationships than generations past. And the data behind these expectations is honestly alarming. We are placing unprecedented, immense demands on the institution of marriage, expecting this perfect, effortless connection, while simultaneously starving the relationship of the everyday, mundane nurturance it actually needs to survive. We are suffocating our own connections by asking for absolutely everything while investing practically nothing. Which brings us to the bedrock, the deepest truth. Layer 5, soulmates or cellmates? This immense cultural obsession with destiny creates two entirely different psychological frameworks. Behavioral scientists divide us into two camps: destiny believers and growth believers. Destiny believers think compatibility is fixed. You're either meant to be or you aren't. Growth believers, on the other hand, think compatibility is something cultivated over time. Notice their reaction to conflict here. When a destiny believer hits a rough patch, they view it as proof that this person simply isn't the one, and they disengage, shut down, or just completely ghost. But when a growth believer hits that exact same conflict, they treat it as valuable information. They roll up their sleeves and get to work. In therapy settings, destiny believers often just show up to ask if they should terminate the relationship, while growth believers achieve really high success rates because they actually embrace the struggle. And here is the hidden danger of the special connection narrative. When the chemical high of the honeymoon phase inevitably fades, and it always does, and those idealized projections wear off, normal human flaws emerge. Unresolved childhood triggers rise right up to the surface. Now, if you're operating on a destiny mindset, this is utterly terrifying, because without continuous growth, without open communication, and without the sheer willingness to do the hard work of reality, that effortless soulmate bond rapidly calcifies into a psychological trap. Very quickly, they become a cellmate. As clinical psychologist John Wellwood so brilliantly observes, intimate relationship has become the new wilderness that brings us face to face with all our gods and demons. True, lasting connection is not something you just passively discover in some magical moment of fated destiny. It is actively forged through the brutal yet beautiful psychological struggle of facing your own blind spots alongside someone who is brave enough to do the exact same thing. We build these grand, exceptionalist narratives about destiny to cope with our own vulnerability. We want the massive reward of deep connection, but without the terrifying risk of the psychological wilderness. So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. Take a hard look at the foundation of your own connections. Are you truly searching for a soulmate, or are you just looking for a magical excuse to avoid the wilderness?